Hello everyone, I'm back with another video for you today, and I know what you're probably thinking. What is Freddy doing? Showing us this strange-looking anime-themed card game. Has he lost the plot? Is this a sponsored video? The answer to both of those questions is no. I've actually really been enjoying this game. I was also very skeptical at first when I saw the Shadowverse gameplay, but I saw a lot of the old Gwent crowd, people like Adzikov, Panda, Mega Mogwai, had been playing Shadowverse, and I figured there must be something to this that I'm missing. Yes, it maybe looks a bit strange, but let me dive in and see what the gameplay is all about. And I'm happy to report that the gameplay in this game is very good. So, today we're going to be diving into what exactly is Shadowverse, how do you play it, and why is it so fun? So Shadowverse has recently released a new version of the game. It's been a game for several years that I played a little bit of, but Shadowverse Worlds Beyond is a fresh take on the game and a sort of reset, which I'm sure has frustrated the old player base to some extent, but this fresh coat of paint and the polishing of the base set, some really intuitive and interesting archetypes, I think is worth checking out. So how do you play Shadowverse? Well, it's quite similar to Hearthstone in many respects. You have minions that you're playing from your hand onto the board, you have mana that's ramping up as the game goes on. You get extra mana if you go second in the same way to getting the coin in Hearthstone, and you're trying to kill the enemy by using your minions to hit the enemy in the face, damage their health total, and take them to zero. So in many ways, quite similar to Hearthstone, the extra added element here is the evolve mechanic, which allows you to either basic evolve your units or super evolve them for an incredibly powerful bonus. And this is an ability that you unlock through the course of a game. It allows your units to trade with the opponents on the board very easily, as your units can immediately attack once they enter the board and have been evolved. So this creates a lot of moments in the game where you're able to quickly clear the board of what the opponent is doing, deal with their threats, and develop your own. As a result, while Hearthstone is a bit more slower paced, and you're developing a board and trying to keep your minions on there for as long as possible, in Shadowverse it's quite different. You're actually destroying the opponent's board very often and having your board destroyed by them. So it's a kind of back and forth where you play a lot of units out, the opponent deals with them in some way, and you deal with the threats that they then put onto the board on their turn. The evolve mechanic is also very interesting because you're sort of managing how many evolves you have throughout the course of the game. Once you use one, you can't get it back. You only have 4 available, and they synergize very strongly with some of your powerful cards. So you're really thinking about when is the best time to use this really powerful resource and when it should be saved, and sort of figuring out the perfect way to use it, the most efficient use of it, and so on. So I find that part really compelling, very interesting. It's sort of like a puzzle that you're solving on each particular turn as to how you're most efficiently going to deal with what the opponent's sending your way, also while keeping in mind the future possibilities, what the opponent might be trying to play later on, their win conditions, your win conditions. So you've got this just incredible soup of a lot of different little puzzles going on that you have to solve and figure out in order to come out victorious in the end. And don't be fooled, this game might seem fairly straightforward when you look at it. You know, you're just killing units, playing your own, but in reality, it's actually very deep and complex. I showed my little brother the game, and he was like just amazed at how difficult playing the game optimally actually is, and just amazed by the complexity, because he thought it was, you know, just going to be a simple Hearthstone clone, essentially. So, I've been really enjoying the gameplay. Of course, there's a ranked ladder, you've got even a bizarre kind of second game within the game where you can hang out with your friends with a little avatar, and you can go and battle people in tournaments and friendly matches and this kind of thing, and even customize your room in the game, which is a little bit strange, but it kind of works, and it's interesting and a cool social feature. And I sort of feel a little bit like the community aspect in this game is going to be a big thing, hopefully, that will help people like myself to enjoy it. I have explored pretty much all the archetypes in the game, and I can say every time you discover a new deck and you start playing it for the first time, it is just such a fresh and exciting experience. It really feels like every archetype is very distinct. The play patterns are so different. It's not like you're just playing a very similar game plan for each, and there's, you know, slight tweaks. No, for example, with Forestcraft, it's sort of a combo deck, and you're trying to mathematically figure out how much damage is needed to kill the opponent, whereas you might have a Runecraft spell deck, which is focused on a bit of control in the early game, but then doing some crazy combos later on, or perhaps you're playing more of an aggro style and just trying to rush down the opponent, or maybe even you play artifacts on the board with a bit Havencraft and you're uninteractive, or you might prefer some kind of mixture of control and aggro, a little bit of aggro at the start, controlling in the late game, and dealing damage to the face. There's even ramp, you know, you've got ramp like you would have had in Hearthstone, where you're playing these big chunky guys out before the opponent can hopefully deal with them. There's a lot of very exciting archetypes. They all play fairly differently in my opinion and are very difficult to get your head around at first. I had to play 5, 10, 15, 20 games just to get to grips with the core mechanics of each different deck. And that's despite being, a card game veteran myself, played a lot of Hearthstone, a lot of Magic, and all these other card games. So I would have thought it'd be fairly straightforward to understand these archetypes, but no, it is difficult, it is complex, it is deep, and you have to constantly be factoring in the win conditions of the opponent's decks alongside your own to find the correct course to victory. So that's something that really appeals to me. In some way, I get that kind of Gwent vibe that I used to get from Gwent. It's not quite the same. I'm not saying it's as good a game, but there's definitely that feeling of figuring out your opponent's next move and the best way to counter it, hand reading the opponent, perhaps even bluffing sometimes, and playing in a way that throws the opponent off. So yeah, I think there's a huge amount of potential in this game. The deck building is also very interesting. I've already been having fun making a few changes here and there to the net decks to improve them, but I think the deck building will improve even more as there are expansions released and more cards come in, as the base set is fairly basic, as the name would suggest. So I can say the one super big complaint I do have with the game, which it's maybe unfair for it to be a super big complaint, but it is the reason why the game has a ton of negative reviews on Steam and has faced a lot of backlash. I think in part it's due to them relaunching an old game and, fucking over the previous player base essentially. But also, the game is kind of pricey if you do want to remain competitive and have competitive decks. You can probably get by with about one meta deck if you are free to play. The game offers a lot of free card packs at the beginning, and you're able to acquire a lot of gold to buy card packs by completing various missions and story quests and practice against AI. So in some way it's a little bit generous at the start, but I think after that point it becomes very difficult to acquire the sheer amount of legendary cards that you need in a deck in Shadowverse. And your opponents are quite often going to be having, a top tier deck with 3 copies of legendary cards in each slot, and you're going to need a lot of legendaries yourself to really compete. So I think you are sort of forced to spend money if you want more than one competitive deck. In some way, I think that's fair, but I think it's understandable that this has caused quite a lot of backlash. There are some tricks you can do to maximize the efficiency of your card collection and make it easier to acquire new decks, but certainly I had to spend some money to be able to access other decks. In fact, I've spent, $140 or so on the game, which of course that's quite a lot of money, particularly when you're thinking a AAA game is $80 these days, something like that. So you're spending quite a lot to get just access to the entire game essentially, and otherwise you're sort of gatekept out of that. That's up to you to decide if that's fair or reasonable or something you prefer to pass on, and I don't blame anyone that decides, this game probably isn't for me if I cannot be free to play. That's perfectly understandable. I was sort of in the same camp, but the gameplay was just so enjoyable. I was so hooked and so addicted that I said, wow, what the heck? I don't want to just make a video on this and, move on. I'd actually rather play it long term, so I am going to invest some money in it, hopefully get some enjoyment as the return from that. What's more, I think there is going to be a very strong tournament scene, it looks like, for this game, which is something I'm very interested in participating in, hopefully. So I've been grinding a lot, trying to get my skill and my ability up so that I can compete hopefully at a decent level. So that if that's something that interests and appeals to you, then perhaps Shadowverse could be even more interesting. There's a $600,000 tournament in the works, or maybe 700,000, I don't know exactly, and all sorts of qualifier tournaments and things like this that you can get your teeth sunk into. So overall, I can recommend Shadowverse. I would say just give it a go if you're even remotely interested in the idea, and perhaps play free to play, get your one deck. The game does give you essentially one starting deck that is actually very competitive, has some of the legendary cards. You can select which of the sort of basic decks you would like to start with, so it's quite generous there. And you're going to be able to play that with a decent amount of success, and certainly I was free to play and managed to get to the diamond level, which is sort of the highest ranking section. So you can reach the highest ranks, I think, free to play, but you might not have the access to other decks is the problem there. So, and it might get difficult with more expansions coming down the line. I think if you're going to jump into the game, you need to do it kind of ASAP and start grinding away. Otherwise, it will be difficult to acquire a collection without spending a lot of money. But overall, I would say Shadowverse, the gameplay is phenomenal. I'm really enjoying it, and I've already played 70, 80 hours, something like this at time of recording, so I'm really loving it. I can recommend it, and I think it's probably not going to be for everyone, but for me, I'm really having a good time. I'm probably going to make videos on it, I would imagine, if that's something that interests people. If there's no interest, then maybe not. Either way, I hope this video is interesting for you. Maybe there's a new card game for you to check out now. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.